Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud While Stoned. Today we begin a new Little Blue book, and this is Little Blue book number 30. Make sure that's correct. Yep, number 30. And it is titled, What Life Means to Me, written by Jack London. And I really wish there was a copyright date on this, but there isn't. 1920s something. And I don't know if this is something that Jack London wrote just for the Little Blue Book series or the 10-cent pocket series as it is titled. As you see there at the top, it says 10-cent pocket series. Whether he wrote this just for them or if this is something that he wrote and published altogether into the world, I don't know. But sadly, no copyright date. So, as soon as I get some hydration, we'll begin. What Life Means to Me by Jack London. One moment. These chairs. Oh, back lumbar piece rolls up to my middle of my back and it's no longer lumbar. Alright, here we go. Ooh, excuse me. Thanks for listening. I'll just burp through the beginning. Good God. Here we go, some more. Oh. Alright, that's enough of that. What Life Means to Me by Jack London. I was born into the working class. I early discovered enthusiasm, ambition, and ideals. And to satisfy these became the problem of my childhood. My environment was crude and rough and raw. I had no outlook, but an uplook rather. My place in society was at the bottom. Here life offered nothing but sordidness and wretchedness, both of the flesh and the spirit. For here flesh and spirit were alike starved and tormented. Above me towered the colossal edifice of society, and to my mind the only way out was up. Into this edifice I early resolved to climb. Up above, men wore black clothes and boiled shirts, and women dressed in beautiful gowns. Also, there were good things to eat, and there was plenty to eat. This much for the flesh. Then there were the things of the spirit. Up above me, I knew, were unselfishness of the spirit, clean and noble thinking, keen intellectual living. I knew all of this because I read Seaside Library. Is that it? Yep. Really? Yeah, I guess so. Wait, maybe not. Let me make sure I only turned one page. And I did. Okay, I knew this all because I read Seaside Library. Novels in which, with the exception of the villains and adventuresses, all men and women thought beautiful thoughts, spoke a beautiful tongue, and performed glorious deeds. In short, as I accepted the rising of the sun, I accepted that up above me was all that was fine and noble and gracious, all that gave decency and dignity to life, all that made life worth living, and that remunerated one for his travail and misery. Remunerated one for his... that sentence just doesn't sort of make sense to me. But it is not particularly easy for one to climb up out of the working class, especially if he is handicapped by the possession of ideals and illusions. I lived on a ranch in California, and I was hard put to find the ladder whereby to climb. I early inquired the rate of interest on invested money, and worried my child's brain into an understanding of the virtues and excellences of that remarkable invention of man, compound interest. Further, I ascertained the current rates of wages for workers for all ages, and the cost of living. For all these data, I concluded that if I began immediately and worked and saved until I was 50 years of age, I could then stop working and enter into participation in a fair portion of the delights and goodness that would then be open to me higher up in society. Of course, I resolutely determined not to marry, while I quite forgot to consider at all the great rock of disaster in the working class world, sickness. But the life that was in me demanded more than a meager existence of scraping and scrimping. Also, at 10 years of age, I became a newsboy on the streets of a city and found myself with a changed up look. All about me were still the same sordidness and wretchedness, and up above me was still the same paradise waiting to be gained. But the ladder whereby to climb was a different one. It was now the ladder of business. Why save my earnings and invest in government bonds? Pardon me. That vape hit coming back to get me. Okay, let's see where we're at. Rate of interest. Okay, here we go. But the life that was in me demanded more than a meager existence of scraping and scrimping. Also, at 10 years of age, I became a newsboy on the street of a city and found myself with a changed uplook. All about me were still the same sordidness and wretchedness, and up above me was still the same paradise waiting to be gained. But the ladder whereby to climb was a different one. It was now the ladder of business. Why save my earnings and invest in government bonds when by buying 2 newspapers for 5 cents with a turn of the wrist, I can sell them for 10 cents and double my capital? The business ladder was the ladder for me, and I had a vision of myself becoming a bald-headed and successful merchant prince. The author became the owner of an oyster boat, and thereby a capitalist, but was ruined by the burning of his boat. From then on, I was mercilessly exploited by other capitalists, and that little side note about the author is just sort of in there, with parentheses around it. I had the muscle, and they... Oops. Okay, from then on, I was mercilessly exploited by other capitalists. I had the muscle, and they made money out of it, while I made but a very indifferent living out of it. I was a sailor before the mast, a longshoreman, a roustabout. I worked in canneries and factories and laundries. I mowed lawns and cleaned carpets and washed windows, and I never got the full product of my toil. I looked at the daughter of the cannery owner in her carriage and knew that it was my muscle, in part, that helped drag along that carriage on its rubber tires. I looked at the son of the factory owner going to college and knew that it was my muscle that helped in part to pay for the wine and good fellowship he enjoyed. But I did not resent this. It was all in the game. They were the strong. Very well. I was strong. I could carve my way to a place among them and make money out of the muscles of other men. I was not afraid of work. I loved hard work. I would pitch in and work harder than ever and eventually become a pillar of society. And just then, as luck would have it, I found an employer that was of the same mind. I was willing to work, and he was more than willing that I should work. I thought I was learning a trade. In reality, I had displaced 2 men. I thought he was making an electrician out of me. As a matter of fact, he was making $50 per month out of me. The 2 men I had displaced had received $40 each per month. I was doing the work of both for $30 per month. This employer worked me nearly to death. A man may love oysters, but too many oysters will discipline him toward the particular diet. And so with me, too much work sickened me. I do not wish ever to see work again. I fled from work. I became a tramp, begging my way from door to door, wandering over the United States and sweating bloody sweats in slums and prisons. I had been born in the working class, and I was now, at the age of 18, beneath the point at which I had started. I was down in the cellar of society, now in the subterranean depths of misery about which it is neither nice nor proper to speak. I was in the pit, the abyss, the human cesspool, the shambles in the charnel house of our civilization. This is the part of the edifice of society that society chooses to ignore. Lack of space compels me here to ignore it, and I shall say only that the things I there saw gave me a terrible scare. Another, in parentheses, statement here. The author reflected and decided that it was better to sell brains than muscle. Then began a frantic pursuit of knowledge. I returned to California and opened the books. While thus equipping myself to become a brain merchant, it was inevitable that I should delve into sociology. There I found in a certain class of books, scientifically formulated, the simple sociological concepts I had already worked out for myself. Other and greater minds, before I was born, had worked out all that I had thought, and a vast deal more. I discovered that I was a socialist. The socialists were revolutionists, inasmuch as they struggled to overthrow the society of the present, and out of the material to build the society of the future. I, too, was a socialist and a revolutionist. I joined the groups of working class and intellectual revolutionists, and for the first time came into intelligent living. Here I found keen, flashing intellects and brilliant wits, for here I met strong and alert-brained, withal horny-handed members of the working class, on-frocked preachers, too wide in their Christianity for their congregation of mammon worshippers, professors broken on the will of university subservience to the ruling class and flung out because they were quick with knowledge which they strove to apply to the affairs of mankind. I'm still stuck on what horny-handed means. Here I found also warm faith in the human glowing idealism, sweetness of unselfishness, renunciation and martyrdom. All the splendid, stinging things of the spirit. Here life was clean, noble, and alive. Here life rehabilitated itself, became wonderful and glorious, and I was glad to be alive. I was in touch with great souls who exalted flesh and spirit over dollars and cents, and to whom the thin wails of the starved slum child meant more than all the pomp and circumstance of commercial expansion and world empire. All about me were nobleness of purpose and heroism of effort. And my days and nights were sunshine and starshine, all fire and dew, with before my eyes, ever burning and blazing, the Holy Grail, Christ's own Grail, the warm, human, long-suffering and maltreated, but to be rescued and saved at the last. As a brain merchant, I was a success. Society opened its portals to me. I entered right in on the parlor floor, and my disillusionment proceeded rapidly. I sat down to dinner with the masters of society, and with the wives and daughters of the masters of society. The women were gowned beautifully, I admit, but to my naive surprise I discovered that they were of the same clay as all the rest of the women I had known down below in the cellar. The Colonel's lady and Judy O'Grady were sisters under their skins and gowns. It was not this, however, so much as their materialism that shocked me. It is true, these beautiful gowned, beautiful women prattled sweet little ideals and dear little moralities, but in spite of their prattle, the dominant key of the life they lived was materialistic. And they were so sentimentally selfish. They assisted in all kinds of sweet little charities and informed one of the fact, while all the time the food they ate and the beautiful clothes they wore were bought out of dividends stained with the blood of child labor and sweated labor and of prostitution itself. When I mentioned such facts, expecting in my innocence that these sisters of Judy O'Grady would at once strip off their blood-dyed silks and jewels, they became excited and angry, and read me preachments about the lack of thrift, the drink, and the innate depravity that caused all the misery in society's cellar. When I mentioned that I couldn't quite see that it was the lack of thrift, the intemperance, and the depravity of a half-starved child of 6 that made it work 12 hours every night in a southern cotton mill, these sisters of Judy O'Grady attacked my private life and called me an agitator, as though that, forsooth, settled the argument. Nor did I fare better with the masters themselves. I had expected to find men who were clean, noble, and alive, whose ideals were clean, noble, and alive. I went out amongst the men who sat in the high places, the preachers, the politicians, the businessmen, the professors, and the editors. I ate meat with them, drank wine with them, automobiled with them, and studied with them. He automobiled with them. It is true, I found many that were clean and noble, but with rare exceptions. They were not alive. I do verily believe I could count the exceptions on the fingers of my 2 hands. They were not alive with rottenness, quick with unclean life. They were merely the unburied dead, clean and noble like well-preserved mummies, but not alive. In this connection, I may especially mention the professors I met, the men who live up to that decadent university ideal, the passionless pursuit of passionless intelligence. We'll stop there, just for hydration. Because Cottonmouth cometh. Behold, Cottonmouth cometh. Ooh. It's the first time I had a slight clog in that. That's one thing I don't like about them. Pardon me. It's coming again. Now we're back. I met men who invoked the name of the Prince of Peace in their diatribes against war, and who put rifles in the hands of Pinkertons with which to shoot down strikers in their own factories. I met men incoherent with indigestion at the brutality of prize fighting, and who, at the same time, were parties to the adulteration of food that killed each year more babies than even red-handed Herod had killed. I discovered that I did not like to live on the parlor floor of society. Intellectually, I was bored. Morally and spiritually, I was sickened. I remembered my intellectuals and idealists, my on-frocked preachers, broken professors, and clean-minded, class-conscious working men. I remembered my days and nights of sunshine and starshine, where life was all a wild wonder, a spiritual paradise of unselfish adventure and ethical romance. And I saw before me, ever blazing and burning, the Holy Grail. So I went back to the working class, in which I had been born and where I belonged. I care no longer to climb. This imposing edifice of society above my head holds no delight for me. It is the foundation of the edifice that interests me. There I am content to labor, crowbar in hand, shoulder to shoulder with intellectuals, idealists, and class-conscious working men, getting a solid pry now and again and setting the whole edifice rocking. Someday, when we get a few more hands and crowbars to work, we'll topple it over, along with all its rotten life and unburied dead, its monstrous selfishness and sodden materialism. Then we'll cleanse the cellar and build a new habitation for mankind, in which there will be no parlor floor, in which all the rooms will be bright and airy, and where the air that is breathed will be clean, noble, and alive. A thought. Far better to have the front of one's face pushed in by the fist of an honest prize fighter than to have the lining of one's stomach corroded by the embalmed beef of a dishonest manufacturer. Jack London. Apparently, embalmed beef was a big problem back in Jack London's day. Which, mind you, was before we had the Food and Drug Administration and companies just didn't care what they put in it. That's the end of part one there. So, well, not part one, but I guess chapter one. We're going to move on to chapter two. Dream of Debs by Jack London. From the book What Life Means to Me. I awoke fully an hour before my customary time. This, in itself, was remarkable, and I lay very wide awake, pondering over it. Something was the matter. Something was wrong. I knew not what. I was oppressed by a premonition of something terrible that had happened or was about to happen. But what was it? I strove to orient myself. I remembered that at the time of the great earthquake of 1906, many claimed they awakened some moments before the first shock, and that during those moments they experienced strange feelings of dread. Was San Francisco again to be visited by an earthquake? I lay for a full minute, humbly expectant, but there occurred no reeling of the walls nor shock and grind of falling masonry. All was quiet. That was it. The silence. No wonder I had been perturbed. The hum of the great live city was strangled silent. The surface cars passed along my street at that time of day on an average of one every 3 minutes, but in the 10 succeeding minutes not a car passed. Perhaps it was a street railway strike, was my thought. Or perhaps there had been an accident and the power was shut off. But no, the silence was too profound. I heard no jar and rattle of wagon wheels, no stamp of iron-shod hoofs straining up the steep cobblestones. Pressing the push-button beside my bed, I strove to hear the sounds of the bell, though I knew it was impossible for the sound to rise 3 stories to me, even if the bell did ring. It rang all right. For a few minutes later, Brown entered with a tray and morning paper, though his features were impassive as ever. I noted a startled, apprehensive light in his eyes. I noted also that there was no cream. The creamery did not deliver this morning, he explained, nor did the baker. I glanced again at the tray. There were no fresh French rolls, only slices of stale gray on the tray. It's GRA. Ham bread from yesterday, the most detestable of bread as far as I was concerned. Nothing was delivered this morning, sir. Brown started to explain apologetically, but I interrupted him. The paper? Yes, sir, it was delivered, but it was the only thing, and it is the last time, too. There won't be any paper tomorrow. The paper says so. Can I send out and get you some condensed milk? I shook my head, accepted the coffee black, and spread open the paper. The headlines explained everything, explained too much. Intact, for the length of pessimism to which the journal went, were ridiculous. A general strike, it said, had been called all over the United States, and most foreboding anxieties were expressed concerning the provisioning of the great cities. I read on hastily. Perfect time for a pause. I read on hastily, skimming much and remembering much of the labor troubles in the past. For a generation, the general strike had been the dream of organized labor, which dream had arisen originally in the mind of Debs, one of the great leaders of 30 years before. I recollected that in my young college settlement days, I had even written an article on the subject for one of the magazines, and that I had titled it The Dream of Debs. And I must confess that I had treated the idea very carefully and academically as a dream and nothing more. Time and the world had rolled on. Gompers was gone. The American Federation of Labor was gone. And gone was Debs. with all his wild revolutionary ideas. But the dream had persisted, and here it was at last realized in fact. But I laughed as I read at the journal's gloomy outlook. I knew better. I had seen organized labor worsted in too many conflicts. It would be a matter only of days when the thing would be settled. This was a national strike, and it wouldn't take the government long to break it. I threw the paper down and proceeded to dress. It would certainly be interesting to be out in the streets of San Francisco when not a wheel was turning and the whole city was taking an enforced vacation. "I beg your pardon, sir," Brown said, as he handed me my cigar case, "but Mr. Harmond has asked to see you before you go out." "Send him in right away," I answered. Harmond was the butler. When he entered, I could see he was laboring under controlled excitement. He came at once to the point. "What shall I do, sir? There will be needed provisions, and the delivery drivers are on strike, and the electricity is shut off. I guess they're on strike, too." "Are the shops open?" I asked. "Only the small ones, sir. The retail clerks are out, and the big ones can't open, but the owners and their families are running the little ones themselves." "Then take the machine," I said, "and go the rounds and make your purchases. But plenty of everything you need or may need. Get a box of candles. No, get half a dozen boxes. And when you're done, tell Harrison to bring the machine around to the club for me. Not later than 11. And I'm assuming the machine means a car. Hammond shook his head gravely. "Mr. Harrison has struck along with the chauffeurs' union, and I don't know how to run the machine myself." Oh, he has he?" I said. "Well, when next Mr. Harrison happens around, you tell him that he can look elsewhere for a position." "Yes, sir." "You don't happen to belong to the Butlers' Union, do you, Harmond?" "No, sir," was the answer. "Even if I did, I'd not desert my employer in a crisis like this. No, sir, I would." "All right, thank you," I said. "Now you get ready to accompany me. I'll run the machine myself, and we'll lay in a stock of provisions to stand a siege." It was a beautiful day of May, even as May days go. The sky was cloudless. There was no wind, and the air was warm, almost balmy. Many autos were out, but the owners were driving them themselves. The streets were crowded but quiet. The working class, dressed in its Sunday best, was out taking the air and observing the effects of the strike. It was all so unusual and withal so peaceful that I found myself enjoying it. My nerves were tingling with mild excitement. It was a sort of placid adventure. I passed Miss Chickering. She was at the helm of her little runabout. She swung round and came after me, catching me at the corner. "Oh, Mr. Scherf," she hailed. Kerf? Scherf? C-E-R-F. Kerf. She hailed, "Do you know where I can buy candles? I've been to a dozen shops, and they're all sold out. It's dreadfully awful, isn't it?" But her sparkling eyes gave the lie to her words. Like the rest of us, she was enjoying it hugely. Quite an adventure it was, getting those candles. It was not until we went across the city and down into the working-class quarter south of Market Street that we found small corner groceries that had not yet sold out. Miss Chickering thought one box was sufficient, but I persuaded her into taking 4. My car was large, and I laid in a dozen boxes. There was no telling what delays might arise in the settlement of the strike. Also, I filled the car with sacks of flour, baking powder, tinned goods, and all the ordinary necessities of life suggested by Harmond, who fussed around and clucked over the purchases like an anxious old hen. The remarkable thing, that first day of the strike, was that no one really apprehended anything serious. The announcement of turning the page, the announcement of organized labor in the morning papers, that it was prepared to stay out a month or 3 months, was laughed at. And yet that very first day we might have guessed as much from the fact that the working class took practically no part in the great rush to buy provisions. Of course not. For weeks and months, Craftily and secretly, the whole working class had been laying in private stocks of provisions. That was why we were permitted to go down and buy out the little groceries in the working class neighborhoods. It was not until I arrived at the club that afternoon that I began to feel the first alarm. Everything was in confusion. There were no olives for the cocktails, and the service was by hitches and jerks. Most of the men were angry, and all were worried. A babble of voices greeted me as I entered. General Folsom nursing his capacious paunch in a window seat in the smoking room was defending himself against half a dozen excited gentlemen who were demanding that he do something. "What can I do more than I have done?" he was saying. "There are no orders from Washington. If you gentlemen will get a wire through, I'll do anything I am commanded to do. But I don't see what can be done. The first thing I did this morning, as soon as I learned of the strike, was to order in the troops from Presidio, 3,000 of them. They're guarding the banks, the mint, the post office, and all the public buildings. There is no disorder whatever. The strikers are keeping the peace perfectly. You can't expect me to shoot them down as they walk along the streets with wives and children, all in their best bib and tucker." Best bib and tucker. "I'd like to know what's happening on Wall Street. I heard Jimmy Wombold said as I passed along. I could imagine his anxiety, for I knew that he was deep in the big consolidated Western deal. Say, Kerf, Atkinson busted up to me. Is your machine running?" "Yes," I answered, "but what's the matter with your own?" "Broken down, and the garages are all closed, and my wife's somewhere around Truckee, I think, stalled on the overland. Can't get a wire to her for love or money. She should have arrived this evening. She may be starving. Lend me your machine." And I think that's where we'll stop. Part 1 of Little Blue Book number 30, titled What Life Means to Me by Jack London. It's become a very interesting read so far, I think. Alrighty, that'll do her. Thanks for listening, and join me in part 2.